Kia ora koutou. Thanks, Richard. I am Mick. We're going to make this fast because we're well behind time. That's not a good start. Right. I don't know where I'm pointing this. I'll push you the green one. Oh, we'll see. I don't know if I'm doing that or you're doing. Okay, so you probably know what Genomics Aotearoa is. If you don't, and I can't see it down here, we'll look up here. It's a collaboration consortium of 10 CRIs and universities. We do genomics work across three major streams: environment, primary production, and health. We also have an Indigenous genomics platform, which has Māori-led, community-driven projects across those three different areas. The mantra for GA is developing infrastructure by doing research. So we're funded by SSIF, which is an infrastructure fund, but the way in which we put that infrastructure in place is through doing research, and we'll talk about one of those projects today. Oh, this is working great. That's everyone involved. This is the good news. So fairly recent good news is that we've had our funding extended from 2025 through to 2030, which I think I've been saying that's going to happen for about the past 2 or 3 research meetings. So that is happening now, and we're currently working on our work program for the next 5 years. But one of the good pieces of news is that the Aotearoa Genomic Data Repository will become part of GA's core business now, and so that will go on for at least the next 5 years. Here's some of the people, well, all of the people involved over 5 years now. And so some of our former team members down the bottom that have gone on to better and brighter things. And then core team up here. I won't go through everything, but basically it's a combination of Genomics Aotearoa people and NeSI people putting this together. So where did this come from? Just a little bit of background. So in our original funding agreement with MB from 2017, we had in there that one of the things that needed to be delivered was a National Genomics Data Repository, including bespoke processes for Māori management of Indigenous data, which is actively populated across all New Zealand genomics research activities, which is a fairly large ask. So over the past 5 years, we've developed, put this into production, and it's actually up and running fairly well, as you'll hopefully see. We're focused on genomic data from taonga species. If you are less familiar with these concepts than you'd like to be, this is a fantastic document. So Te Nohonga Kaitiaki is a document that was led by Maui Hudson at University of Waikato. It's one of the pieces of work that came out of Genomics Aotearoa, and it does a really good job of talking about the guidelines for doing research with taonga species in New Zealand. And so those 3 points there basically sort of flow through basically defining what taonga species are, and pretty much indicating that all Indigenous flora and fauna within New Zealand can be considered taonga. Right, a little bit more ancient history, although Ben wouldn't like me saying ancient. So a lot of the work that was done initially on this to put protocols in place for both data submission and data access were done by our inaugural Vision Mātauranga manager, Ben Tiaika. And so I like to put Ben's quote in here, which is, once our data leak Aotearoa, they lose any and all protections provided by the Treaty of Waitangi. So it's really important when we're thinking about Indigenous data sovereignty that we're thinking about in-nation storage for these data. Another thing there, we'll talk about this in a minute, I've highlighted kaitiaki. So a distinguishing feature of this database, this repository, is that in order for researchers to be able to access the data, they need to get the permission of the kaitiaki, so the Māori group, whānau, hapū, iwi, that have kaitiakitanga over the data or guardianship over the data. So it's not just an open access repository, but you are able to request access. Those requests are assessed, and then if they're approved, you get access. If you're interested in the process, there's lots more detail in this molecular ecology resources paper that was published. But basically goes through the data submission process, how you get data into the repository, and how you can get data out. And the important part there is the big red box, which is the process of putting in an application, that being passed on to the kaitiaki contact. Either that individual or group make a decision about your access request. They may want more information, in which case they'll come back through me and I can request more information. And then all going well, you get access to that data. And there are various conditions that you have to agree to in terms of what you can do with that data. You're not allowed to share it. You're not allowed to make it publicly available, that sort of thing. There'll be a fixed amount of time you can have access to it for, but all of that's specified in the access agreement. A big thing that's happened recently, last couple of years, is that we've got a Māori advisory board. So the members are all up there. I think Tahoe was mentioned in Jeanette's talk yesterday. These are a fantastic group that are providing us some really great guidance on basically how to run the repository, tikanga aspects of governance of the repository, and how to ensure that we're aligning with principles of Māori Data Sovereignty. So this has been a great step forward. And we've also got one of the GA board on there as well. Jan Hania is on our advisory board, but also on the overarching GA board, which is great. A great connection up to our official governance. Just to see how things have gone, so if we go back to 2022, which is the first screenshot I could find, we had 10 projects in there already. Claire will give us a bit more of a timeline. And then every time there's any research meeting, we seem to need a screenshot of this. So I've got them sort of in February. I obviously didn't talk because I've got an April one here, and then it looks like it's going to get cut off, that's right. So you can see the growth. So we've got 25 projects, 44 projects, and 54 projects. So we're growing all the time. We're getting more and more samples coming in. People are using this. You can see the file number went up there. Was that course run? How many files? I don't know. Lots. Thousands and thousands and thousands in that data set. So we've had some pretty big data sets. There's been some really good challenges. But kudos to the NeSI team for stepping up and working through those challenges. Here's what's in there currently. I actually don't know if that's completely up to date. Thank you, Claire. So you can see there's lots of familiar names in there. And so all of these, almost all of these have a kaitiaki contact associated with them. And so if a request is made to access this data, that gets passed on, and then the process continues, and hopefully people get access. So there's a reasonable amount in there. It's growing all the time, and we're currently processing more. And that's where I say thank you, NeSI team, for all the hard work you've done. And it's my promise to hand over to Claire and give you the wonderful clicker.
Ngā mihi nui. Good morning, everyone. I feel like I've already introduced myself a few times, so I'll just go on through. So I guess reflecting slightly on the past 5 years of AGDR, I joined the project about 3 years ago. So I guess from the NeSI side, it was Jun and others before that. But really, I guess looking at from a slightly more technical perspective, the evolution of the systems, and this was very much an early pre-pilot, do what we can. We had project data sets quite before we were ready with a system, which was really exciting, but also slightly terrifying. And so I think the sort of the live system that would sort of call production, it took us a couple of years. 2021 that went live in Cloud Catalyst. So obviously New Zealand based system, and then moved to NeSI's own infrastructure when that cloud was ready in 2023. And I feel like we launched it in time for possibly this meeting, and then everything crashed and we had to bring it back up on Cloud Catalyst. And so we had it running on both for a while, and then NeSI system has stabilized, so we've got it just on production on the Research Developer Cloud. In terms of a couple of milestones to mention, minting DOIs was something we didn't initially do, but was actually quite important from getting the repository recognised with the publishers. And so that's been a sort of a big push to get that recognised as a legitimate repository for genomic data. And also, obviously, we've heard yesterday from Jeanette about the local context and the biocultural labels. So we integrated with local context about 2023. We've got one project which I think is on next. So yeah, I guess we have multiple modules of governance, but it was we were keen to include obviously the labels if that was appropriate for the iwi and researchers working with those data sets. So we sort of had that functionality before we actually had a data set. But we now have our first actual data sets where we've got the biocultural notice there displayed. And I guess just to mention from an AGDR perspective, we're now I think as of last week, signed integration partner. So that's quite exciting for us as well. Just a very brief look behind the scenes. So we have the Gen 3 portal from a discovery perspective, which is where you saw the screenshots from. That keeps all the metadata, but actually the data is housed with a NeSI, and both submission and access to that data is done through Globus.
Yeah.
We still have a fairly manual access and submission forms with Google Forms, and we're looking, I guess, in the next 6 months, hopefully, to upgrade that to its own resource management system from a kaitiaki perspective, so we can get sort of more of an interactive portal from that perspective as well. Metadata schema, I won't talk to you too much, I promise, but this is where I get excited. We had a first go at a metadata schema which was designed with the community over a couple of workshops, and we sort of did what we thought was quite a good job at the time. Turns out when you actually ingest a whole lot of data, you work out how bad a job you've done. And so we've now got a new one which looks about as complicated as the old one. We've added a few fields where we were missing things, and researchers were saying, hang on, I need somewhere to put this. We've taken a few fields out that were never used, and then we've tried to change the structure to allow for a few more models of experiments, so to allow for kind of longitudinal studies, and also because you never want to get into a debate with a researcher about what defines a project. We have sort of an ability to have an umbrella project with data sets underneath that, or you can have one-to-one, you can have multiple-to-one, and you can kind of design that as fits the research rather than kind of how we arbitrarily say your data should fit. So I think that's had a great uptake since we've changed that model, and you can also allows you to link to external data if it's housed somewhere else. If, for example, you've got a project that looks at taonga and non-taonga species, and some of that data is maybe an ENA, you can link it that way. Finally, this is just another way of showing that we're growing data-wise as we go. So I guess just in conclusion, and hopefully we're just about catching up on time, we're in production, the system's growing. It's really great to see, I guess, the community get behind it. We've seen quite a lot of growth in submissions and also growth in people applying for access, both within Aotearoa and also internationally. Often those international applications require a bit more coaching around how to do research in a context of Aotearoa. As I mentioned earlier, we've now got kind of acceptance with journals, which is awesome. And I guess this is maybe a broader comment too, that's not just relevant to AGDR, but that it sort of feels like Indigenous data sovereignty generally is becoming seen as key in terms of data management internationally. So it's kind of nice to be seeing that uptake. And finally, thanks to everyone for funding and the team and everything else. Awesome. Questions?
Empty.
30 minutes instead of 20, we're a long way towards hitting each other. Time. So, you can torture our colleagues here with a couple of questions. Do we have any comments, questions?
Thanks.
Time stand up.
Thanks. Both a question for either of you, I guess. I'm interested in that data access process.
Mm-hmm.
Could you tell us a little bit more about that and how it would work on a scale?
Scale in terms of if hundreds of thousands of people suddenly wanted access.
Hundreds of thousands of data sets and, yes, hundreds of thousands of requests.
I think given the state of New Zealand science funding at the moment, I doubt we'll get hundreds of thousands of data sets in there. It's still a it's still a pretty manual process. So it's you click, you fill out a form. It comes to me, I read it, I make sure that there's enough information on there to pass on. If there's not, I go back. So it is a menu curation, but I think that also reflects sort of the nature of what we're doing. We're acknowledging that these are data that someone has guardianship over. So automating that process would be pretty much impossible. So at the moment, I think the answer is it's at a scale that is manageable. I think the current system wouldn't scale to a really, really high throughput situation. I don't see that happening in the nearish future. I think we'll see it coming if it does come. Famous last words.
Each data set that is in the you already have a kaitiaki identifier.
Yes.
Ready to
Yes.
review requests.
Yeah. So that's part of when you that's part of the submission process. So when you submit the data, you have to list whatever Māori organisation or group that you worked with in the generation of that data.
I just wondered what sort of percentage of requests are refused?
I don't know that we've had one refused. I think you're going to ping me on the science funding comment. What generally happens is there's not enough information provided. I'll often go back to the researcher, or there might be a particular question from a kaitiaki, and then I go back, and they often won't respond. They're usually international people. So it's often a fairly light international inquiry that comes in, and by the time I sort of go back and ask them for information, you just don't hear from them again. So most of the New Zealand requests have been all the information's there, and it's a pretty simple process.
You mentioned international ones. Are there any extra challenges that are tied to that? Or I mean, there are obviously, but how has that been managed or resolved?
The biggest issue is that when we ask about have you had any consultation or interaction with Māori about use of this data set, and sometimes they'll tick yes, but it's very clear they mean no. And so usually when we things like that, I will usually send them an email, quite a detailed email, and I'll send them a copy of Te Nohonga Kaitiaki to have a little read of. And actually it's surprising how many people come back with some really good answers, then having, they actually care enough to read through their document and gain an understanding of why we're doing this. So that's basically the process that we use. We just try and sort of...
Well, some of that is actually an extra benefit then in terms of what we're providing in terms of an approach to Indigenous sovereignty. How many international ones are there? I mean, do you have a sense of the breakdown?
I'd say it's 50, I was going to say 50-50 on application, but not 50-50 on...
Completion?
Completion, yeah.
Okay, cool, yeah.
Just a quick one. You're building an extremely valuable resource. What happens at the end of 5 years?
Look, last year it was what happens at the end of 2024, so I just got us 5 more.
Sure. This is not new. Yeah.
One of the tasks is this needs to be a standalone resource. So we've essentially bought ourselves 5 years to ensure that this is an ongoing resource in perpetuity. It was slightly dodgy when I had to answer those questions last year, because we didn't have a guarantee of funding then. So yeah, long term, this should be a standalone resource, and we just need to figure out how that is funded longer term. I look in MB's direction.